Alright, today, so since I'm on the World War II era and in the Freedom of Information Act vault kick for the FBI and other things, I decided maybe I'd look at Amelia Earhart. And there seems to be some controversy, and I'm kind of thinking it's not really, it may not actually exist. There's been extensive investigation into what happened to Amelia Earhart. And so when we do first look at the FBI files, and I think actually everything you'd want to know about Amelia Earhart, and I think it's a matter, I'm pretty sure it's a matter of opinion as to what happened to her, because no one really knows, but there seems to be reports of her sending radio signals at all sorts of times, heard by different people at different places and under different conditions, from fantastic places. And so basically, maybe what I'll end up going over is there's 4 collections actually. This is these 2 are searches by the Navy and Coast Guard. These are, I think these came from the State Department. There's a lot of information about Amelia Earhart on the State Department's Freedom of Information Act. I got this from the Internet Archive, and so someone probably took the time to find all these different single PDF documents and put them together. And this is, guess what, the FBI file. And I figured, with J. Edgar Hoover's penchant at collecting dossiers on people, he might actually have if we have any chance of finding, if there's any chance there's any information on Amelia Earhart or what might have happened to her, it's going to be in here. I'll tell you that for sure. Now, just give some historical background. So Amelia Earhart disappeared in 1937, and she was doing a flight around the world. She had a new airplane that was high tech for the time, latest and greatest, made by Lockheed. New engines, things like that. And she'd made it almost all the way around the world. She started out in California and went literally across the world, made it to New Guinea, just south of Japan there, and then her next stop was going to be on a island that was disputed as who had proper control over it. It was called Howland, probably still is called Howland Island, and that was going to be her next stop. And the amazing thing about this is that this is 1937. I mean, airplanes were starting to, they'd moved out of the Orville Wilbur Wright stage, and they were getting, to the point, as you know, by World War II, they were a major component of war. But there was a rapid progression in the 30s regarding airplane technologies, and this was a reasonably good plane. Better than the plane that she used to fly across the United States, as I understand it. And the political situation was as such. It was, 1937, the Japanese were given administrative duties over the what's now called the nation of Micronesia by the League of Nations. And it wasn't clear as to whether Howland Island was a part of all that. Or at least the Americans wanted to argue that it wasn't clear that Howland Island was a part of all that. So what's kind of odd about this is Roosevelt was president at the time, and he had a runway constructed on Howland Island, which is just a small, pretty small area. I don't even know if if people live there even to this day. Let's see. And this runway was built just for Amelia Earhart to land. Okay, I'm just going to do Google Maps right now. We're take a look at Howland Island. Then I'll get into some of the initial evidence. Let's get a satellite view here. I mean, look at that. There you go. There's Howland Island. There's just an island that apparently someone's taken the time to mow, and pretty nice looking beaches. But besides that, there's just nothing there. Now, at one point, there was actually a runway on this island. Don't know if I could really tell you by this picture where that was, and let's just look this up on Wikipedia. Why not? Uninhabited Coral Island. And I don't know. 450 acres. It really has no economic. There's no one there. I mean, it's just an island. If you were stranded on that island, you may not be found. Okay, so this is where she was going to head, and then from there, she was going to fly on to maybe Hawaii, or she's almost done. A couple days away from finishing her trip around the world, and I'll first just mention what we do know. Basically, she took off from the last place that she landed at, which the day before her trip was short. I forgot the name of the place, but it's an airport, a small runway in New Guinea. And she took off, and she was sending radio signals for a while, and she never showed up at Howland Island, so Roosevelt sent out 3 warships to look for her in the area, and they spent let's see how many days. And she was a very popular person. She's done an awful lot for women's rights. 2nd of July. It seems a little bit early. I thought she disappeared on the 3rd of July. Anyway, so they were out there till mid-July. They were out there for 2 weeks looking for her. Now, the political situation was that Japan controlled the area of Micronesia. And they're, from what I've read somewhere, I mean, I haven't seen the original, but the Japanese diplomat said, don't come in here into our area at all. Just don't do that. And so the U.S. didn't. When we ended up trying to search for her, we assumed that she had landed south and maybe east of this Howland Island at the Phoenix Islands, and we just kept searching and kept going out there and never found her, unfortunately. So to this day, and there's 2 groups to this day. There are 2 major theories as to what happened to her. 3, actually. Theory number 1 is her plane went straight in the water She died. We'll never find a trace of her. The water's deep. We're not going to find her until we comb the bottom of the ocean with cameras someday. Group number 2 believes that she landed and that she died stranded on a island in the Pacific under conditions I won't comment on, because it could vary. Did she die immediately? Did the plane explode, or was she there for a month, or But I'll read some things that suggest she may have been there for quite a while, and then I'll mention what I think happened, and then I'll talk about all the evidence. Third group believes that somehow she ended up in Saipan, was a prisoner for the Japanese for many years, probably well after D-Day, was killed, and then there was, I'll just say this, there was evidence that, just to start as a summary, is there are numerous people that say there was some evidence that the Japanese did at least get her airplane, if not capture her. And then, but to comment on that, there was renewed interest in Amelia Earhart's case. It's in the early 1960s, and the Japanese government, it is said, had dug through all their papers and files, and under General MacArthur's orders at the time, I guess he was still there in 1960, that to look for any documents or record of Amelia Earhart being captured and executed subsequently. They found none. However, that's not the end of the story, because we're told, and this actually relates to the Kuhn case, that the United States government took a lot of documents. They just took them out of Japan and brought them to Washington, D.C., and there were so many of them that even by 1960, they still hadn't cataloged them all. And then at some point, we decided to give up, and maybe we gave them back to the Japanese, or maybe we gave them to the Library of Congress, or maybe we gave them to different, we just don't know. It's kind of like it just got lost with time, at least according to one guy's report. And there's a very detailed report in one of these documents. Well, I'll start out with the vault, because it gets interesting. It gets kind of tantalizing, but with the contents of the FBI vault. Now, what I find odd about this is people would send things to the FBI, and you just have to wonder why would people send information to the FBI on something that doesn't seem to be a federal crime. I mean, certainly more likely that she was lost rather than kidnapped. But nonetheless, people would do this. So this first one here is extraordinarily interesting, and we end up finding out who this person is, even though it's redacted. In fact, there are actually two reports. Now, one thing that's important to note, there's a few technical things that are important to note. Number one, that we are told that neither Amelia Earhart or her companion, I think his name was Noonan, if I remember that right, knew Morse code. she had actually, I think she also had left her lifeboat back in, for some reason she had problems with room in her plane, and at some point, either before she left initially, she left the lifeboat. So I'm told, by one of these documentaries, that she had left her lifeboat and her Morse code documentation, I guess. And she didn't take it with her. And there's sparse evidence, but there is evidence that she made it. And I'm just going to say right now what I think happened is that she was stranded. I think she was stranded for quite some time, and then she was finally, I believe, she was finally found by in her. Oh yeah, Noonan was injured. She wasn't. There's very good reason for me to believe that she was found by a man that did fishing. But before I get to that, just to mention that the Japanese had volunteered to search for her, and so did New Zealand. Okay. I haven't really checked New Zealand's archives to see if they've heard anything, but there was one document from the government of Australia to the FBI that's in here. But to get back to this, so they didn't. So I'll get back to what I think. So I think they were found by this Japanese fisherman who kind of hung out in that general area. I mean, this is like the middle of nowhere. I mean, thousands of miles away from much of anything. I guess her next stop would have been Hawaii after Howland Island. I mean, it's this tiny thing. And I believe that when she was probably taken to Saipan, and then the Japanese suspected her of spying. I mean, I don't think airplanes were in that much of use, even though it was just a matter of years that there was just whole fighting forces that were in airplanes. They weren't really used all that much, and there might have been some fear about it. It's not really clear as to whether they knew who she was, or if she said who she was. They didn't speak Japanese. Amelia Earhart was well known around the world and liked. Even by the Japanese, just as much as they liked Babe Ruth. So it's really strange what happened. So, but nonetheless, there could have been some people that didn't know who she was, and the right people didn't find out, or cared to investigate who this American woman was and her male companion were. And the Japanese were very secretive about what they were doing, because they were actually building up their forces in Micronesia to prepare for the upcoming war. So there were some tensions between the United States and the Japanese, and the Japanese had no interest in having the American warships start sailing in their waters and find out they were building landing strips hither and yon. So they ended up, what they ended up doing is the government didn't know who she was. And so I actually believe she was imprisoned, and her airplane was brought over, to Saipan, and apparently, it was probably about, I don't know if one would think the Japanese government would want to examine the plane for intelligence, but and she died before the Americans, was killed or died before the Americans invaded Saipan, which was one of the Battle of Saipan was a horrific human tragedy. Yet citizens, rather than fall under the jurisdiction of the United States, decided to jump off the cliffs. It's horrible. Anyway, so that's the backdrop of what we have. But there's a little piece of information here and there that helps bring into light perhaps some things that may or may not have happened. So I found this extraordinarily interesting, and it was pretty much disregarded by the FBI, but they really couldn't act on it. In fact, this is the very first. But this one I have a little bit of trouble believing, but it may still have been an attempt. And let me explain a few other technical things. So apparently, the radio frequencies that Amelia Earhart was using pretty much is what falls in the bandwidth of what today we would call shortwave. And shortwave radio can travel an awful long distance, but apparently it isn't really all that predictable. You could have, what I mean by that is you can have, at least from what I'm perceiving, but what I've read here is that boats that were in the water, maybe within 500 miles of Amelia Earhart, couldn't clearly hear radio signals she was sending, while reports were coming out of Wyoming that they heard her making dispatches. Now this is the first, and this is right after, just before the U.S. fleet was going to give up. And this is pretty much it's not very clear as to what gone on, but there was no address supplied. Someone wrote in handwriting on Western Union that July 15th, that basically what she believes is that she heard, I don't even know where this was dropped off or anything, but it basically says that this is just a belief. Okay, this isn't the one. Excusez-moi. This is the one. And this was September 25th, 1937. So this is after she disappeared. And this is not very... It could have been said a lot easier, but she basically said that she had her radio on at 4 o'clock and she heard ... and then Tuesday afternoon ... This person just believed it was Amelia Earhart calling the United States. Now that's not so interesting. There's another individual that waited quite a while. Waited until 1943. And her name was C.B. Paxton. So we come to find out. This is another one of those pointless redactions that remain in the FBI files. Because someone else wrote later and said, hey, someone named C.B. Paxton from Ashland, Kentucky that wrote us. Okay, so this C.B. Paxton not only wrote the FBI, but also wrote the Office of Naval Intelligence. But this was in 1943. We may have already taken over Saipan by that time. But anyway, this is amazing. So she says, and I presume she was in Kentucky. And this is what she says. And this, actually, a lot of this still holds to this day, even though it was disregarded. The note down here says, information contained therein furnished to MID and ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. This information, before they stated that they are of the opinion that this was erroneous. This is the word erroneous down here. There's still people talking about these ideas to this day. And I think there's even other reports that back up this idea. Okay. So she says that she picked up Amelia Earhart's distress signal by shortwave radio. 300 to 400 words. And she described that she was at Millie or Mulgrave Atoll near the Clee Passage and Knox Island and seemed to be located on a small island of 133 acres. That'd be a quarter the size of Howland Island, adjoining Knox, directly northeast of a part of Marshall Island, which was under Japanese administration at the time. The above message was accidentally picked up. Of course, she was just scanning through the radio, listening for stuff. Static did not interfere with the reception at the time, but later all the messages were overlapped. I heard the call letters one time only, but heard the names several different times. She stated very plainly they had everything. And that's interesting for more than one way, but I doubt the Japanese would allow her to send a distress signal after they picked her up. So I think it was, I don't know exactly what day she disappeared on. She disappeared on July 2nd. July 2nd. So this is just before you have to wonder, well, why didn't all the warships out there hear this? She doesn't say what radio signal she was listening to, but when you have a short wave, you just kind of turn the dial and you listen, you hear something, see if it's anything you're interested in hearing. Eastern Standard Time was given the time of her broadcast. Many people have disagreed with me. She stated the exact time. I don't know what she means by some of this. So she doesn't say what the frequency was, but because Amelia Earhart was generally using 2 frequencies, and as long as she had battery power, her radio was apparently battery powered. She said the food supply was good. She said there was not any habitation or life, but some vegetation. It was a bleak place, but they were all right. And she spoke of the captain's injury, and that's going to be very important. Then another thing that's very important is just this individual doesn't even know where these islands are, but I'll show you where they are. There's a Knox or a Tarawa Island. She said the plane was drifting. Reports from the the Navy indicate the plane would have floated. The last time I heard the name spoken was August 10th of that year. And maybe a few times after that date. So, wow. I mean, to me, and this, look, if she landed, this is probably true. This was just regarded, but this is probably true. And I'll talk about there's some technical information. She was using 2 radio signals, and supposedly one of them was one signal was better at night than it was at day. And of course, the Navy ships only search during the day. Now, this woman says that she heard this at 2:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know if it still would have been nighttime wherever she was. She also said that she just assumed someone else heard her distress signal and didn't really point anything out. Now this report was submitted in 1944. It's a year after that other one. And there's basically, what this says is there was a soldier who actually says he was Amelia Earhart's cousin. At one point even was so bold as to ask the Japanese if his cousin Amelia Earhart was still alive. And the Japanese officer was surprised, and then the Japanese officer says, "He can't tell you anything. Don't worry about her well-being. She's perfectly all right." And this was taken down by the FBI. And I don't know how an American airplane would sound different from a Japanese airplane. And he basically says there are a lot of other people that believe that. And there's another ex-member of the armed forces that was in some place that was soon thereafter. He's in the Philippine Islands when the Japanese took over. He was taken prisoner, but he was in a hotel room where the walls were so thin that he overheard the Japanese, when they spoke in English, mention Amelia Earhart. Then this one is very, very interesting. Now, what had happened, this is Australia, and I'm going to go through the ones that are very interesting, is that, and these are all in the FBI's vault. Someone that was living in California sent to the Australian government, I guess the Commonwealth Investigation Service in Canberra. This is in 1947, and he says, "I think that, Amelia Earhart's still alive, so why don't you just, go send out your feelers." And well, this is Australia writing to the FBI. Then this is the actual letter they got, and they sent the copy to the FBI. Australia sent the copy to the FBI. And this was written 4th March 1947. He basically says, well, if you send a couple spies up there to look around for in some area, you'll find Mr. Noonan still alive or something. It seems a lot very speculative, but nothing really he sent a picture of Dr. Noonan. He's hoping the Australians would do something. And again, here's another. So thank you for the letter. Thank you for telling us that you think it's all bunk, Mr. Hoover. But here's another letter that we got. Now here, I thought this was very interesting. There's this guy named Ajima. This is the guy I think that found them. And that he mentions this name is kind of surprising, because it comes up again, actually, or the idea there was some person on a boat does come up again in a very detailed report that's actually came from the State Department. This is the kind of guy that would sail around in the most abandoned places of the Pacific and perhaps had come across these people. And come across Amelia Earhart. This is not really all that interesting. There's an individual. This is written much later. I mean, this is way too late to do something if Amelia Earhart was still being held. But this individual basically says that years ago, Amelia Earhart was flying in the area and had to make an emergency landing, and then they went to help her out, and then she got back in the plane and the piece of paper flew out. And they sent a copy of the piece of paper with her handwriting on it in case they needed it for handwriting analysis, and they just sent it back to her. No, we don't want it. Then here, someone's going to write a book. And for some reason, I don't know what department this is. Some part of the government. What is it? I don't know. Sent a carbon copy of their opinions. Someone let the government see the book, and they looked it over and wanted to. They say that, yeah, we know about this person who was in the Philippines, and you overheard conversations, and and the FBI says, oh, well, just make sure you don't. And this is actually what it is, and here is the mention of Mrs. Paxton, who wrote that first letter, Ashland, Kentucky, with her address. Same, Marshall Islands, Millie Atoll, Mulgrave, okay. Clepacket, Passage, or whatever. The rest of this doesn't really go into all that. And they want to do a television show, but that's basically all the FBI has. But it is a sound basis actually, for some, later investigations touch on a lot of these subjects. And I think even some of the current investigators don't even mention this report because there's so many of them. This, I assume, came out of the Navy. I got this from the Internet Archive. I don't know where it's housed originally. These are the facts they believe they gathered. And out to around here, there's the group that believes that she either perished by plane crash into the ocean and or perhaps, but they're skeptical of it, survived and landed on an island, tend to only focus on these bits of radio signals. What they say is that if the plane could float, but if it was floating, they couldn't send any. They believe that it couldn't be able to send any radio signals. But whatever. Unless you try it, you don't know, right? This right here, it says the plane landed. They conclude the plane landed on an uncharted reef or island, or on the water. And whether it was within 300 miles of Howland, I don't know. Let's take a look at these. Go back to this, because this is actually... This person put a reputation on the line in the days when Hoover was collecting dossiers. But basically, let's look at the... let's look for Knox Island here, huh? Actually, I'm going to go to... So there's Knox Island. She said that she was on a small island of 133 acres. Here. Now, this is the Allengate Atoll, and then when she says, or wait, let's see, where's Mulgrave Atoll? Okay, so there's Knox Island down there. This is the Millie and or Mulgrave Atoll. And the water is actually pretty shallow. This right here might be the Clee Passage, where these two quasi bodies used to connect, and they no longer do. Basically, there's a bunch of water in the middle of this thing. So she was saying that she was down here. Now, in the grander scheme of things, the Marshall Islands was definitely under Japanese control at the time. Here's Howland, here's Baker, there's Marshall. She was in Japanese territory. So, and what the Navy had thought had happened, let's just go back here. She started up somewhere down here. So I'm getting that. She starts somewhere around there. And she was supposed to head this way, but instead she headed that way. Is what I believe happened, and they actually and they actually call them the Gilberts. They have so many different names for this thing. There were some other, like here, someone in Rock Springs, Wyoming. These are some of the these are the different signals that came out. Possibilities are rising for rumors and reports, and they did say that all these different conflicting reports were supposedly causing them problems, but the real problem is they were in Japanese territory. On 3rd July, plane gave distress call and gave position. So this is a whole day later. She would have been out of gas, so she landed somewhere. Gave position of 1.6 and 170 north or south and east or west, unreported. Coast Guard gave credibility to this report. So she survived, at least, to land. She did, her plane did not end up. The problem was that she ran out of gas. One of these documentaries said that she had to fly at higher altitude against some wind than what was anticipated, and so she was going to use 10% more of her gas, and there it was. Now, some people think that the Japanese may have shot her down out of the sky, but that's a pretty desolate area. I will say that. She doesn't say anything like that. Possibilities and rumors writing, that the plane was down on water north of Holland, as indicated by radio tests arranged through station KGMB. There was a radio station that was going to conduct a test for a location, and apparently thought that she was maybe over here somewhere. That's a huge area. Her dashes made by transmitter. HMS Achilles is a British ship. Don't know what those mean. Extremely doubtful report, 281 degrees north Howland. Of course, there's 360 degrees, so yeah. We got three circles, 360. Let's just do, let me get some directions to Howland Island. Down here. So you have a circle, 180, 270, and 280. 280. Yeah. There you go. That doesn't sound like a rumor to me. 10 hours west. Plane between Howland and Samoa group 10 hours west. Someone in Eureka, California, heard her voice saying, "Plane on roof," because at the beginning the plane was floating, but I guess it toppled upside down. No, plane on reef. 200 miles directly south of Howland. Both okay, no wing broken. That doesn't seem right. That seems doubtful. Additional reported position 176 degrees. 213 miles west-northwest. Five South Island Jesus in vicinity. Maybe she was hallucinating. Also island nameless on course further north. 171 west, 3 south. I don't know what that means. George Palmer Putnam requested a search of 170 degrees east. Maybe thinking that the plane was floating in water. That's a long way. So obviously, if these were actually stated, and of course over time you're going to start getting, you have nothing to drink. I mean, there's no provision. But they said they had some difficulty finding her. Alright, now for some more detailed stuff, because a lot of the stuff is repeated or not really all that good. This report here is actually very good. My search for Amelia Earhart by Fred Gorner. It was released in 1966, and this is just an extraordinary report. It starts out where there was a woman that says that one day she was in 1937 riding her bicycle in Saipan, taking lunch to her brother-in-law, a man who later attacked the guy who wrote this article, and was searching for bones that were said to be Amelia Earhart's that didn't turn out to be. Then there was two white persons. One was a woman. Both were thin. They looked very tired. Doesn't say what portion of the year. It says, yes, it was 1937 because I graduated from blah, blah, blah. They were American flyers, and there was a plane they had, and he went on to investigate this. He went to Saipan several times, talked to several different officials from different government agencies, and finally, at one point, woke up in the middle of the night with this Joseph guy searching his room. But at one time, let's see where it's highlighted. Found this to be very interesting. 4th of July, the station received carrier waves. July 7th, Earhart calling. On coral southwest of unknown island. Do not know how long we will. Fading out. Went to check it out. Let's see. And people keep emerging from the woodwork saying, "Oh, I dug up Amelia Earhart's grave. Or I dug up Amelia Earhart's grave." There were military officers, and there's actually a good website where they talk to witnesses that are alive as of this date. But there's one individual here saying that he had found a photograph of Amelia Earhart with some Japanese officer. He examined some documents and found that the Japanese told us to fuck off when we wanted to fly over the Marshall Islands to look for Amelia Earhart, and we probably would have found her. The following day, Admiral Nimitz said, "Now that you're going to Washington, Fred, I want to tell you that Earhart and her navigator did go down in the Marshalls and were picked up by the Japanese." All right. I had another look at the Navy's classified Earhart file and found that another piece of evidence had been added. A tourist U.S. Navy passage with no heading stated, at 10:30 the morning of the disappearance, Nauru radio station picked up Earhart at 6210, saying land in sight ahead. And then nearly 2 hours after Amelia had supposedly run out of gas, a radio station in the British-controlled Gilbert Islands had received her voice. There's all sorts of surprises in this thing, and this is at it's available at the Internet Archive. Amelia Earhart by the government, it says. Then Nimitz comes back. "Oh, I can't understand why the Marine Corps is. The Marine Corps is covering up for something. Perhaps the State Department blocked it." Blah blah blah. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the files I have access to now. In fact, all government agencies were adamant they weren't covering anything up, and they probably weren't. This is why I think the Japanese didn't know who they had as their prisoner. Territory mandated to Japan. It was a race to find Amelia Earhart. All right, let's go. It's called Saipan. They recovered over a dozen items at the atoll. This is this here is a talk about this guy made a movie out of this. Now, this guy who did this, I will say he also has YouTube videos talking about the afterlife. I mean, basically, his position is that if people are saying that they're not going to speculate as to how she got into Japanese hands. I can. I mean, somewhat. I mean, the boat fisher found her. He's just saying that there's hundreds of witnesses, and you'll see people that are people that were stationed in Saipan after they were there to take over the air base in a horrific battle. What the hell? I know that this yeah, here it is. Yeah, so I thought. It gets kind of noisy here, but eventually he does interview some people.
I grabbed it and ran off with it and opened it up. And lo and behold, it was Amelia Earhart's papers off her airplane, her briefcase she had on the airplane. I may have been just...
And he never got that back.
But
there it is.
Wore right. Insignias on their collars, but I kept... You could get it after the war. Now,
he never got it.
Military value. It was a civilian, something like that. And I spotted one.
The blue beaches.
Of course, he has no proof of that. This guy would. Okay. This guy was a decoder, and he saw a cable. He decoded a cable that said they had Amelia Earhart's airplane.
Everybody said of it we had one because we
were a group of Marines commandeered by one person who came forward and said, "This is off limits. These off." So I says, we were at the field there, and they said that Amelia Earhart's airplane is in a hangar there.
Charlotte, Japanese headquarters. During that time, American lady had been captured, that she was taken to the Japanese High Command's office in Jalloud.
Here's a doctor that treated. This doctor treated Mr. and Mrs. Earhart, or at least American man and woman that was, just appeared out of nowhere in Saipan around the time Amelia Earhart was gone.
They speak very good English, so you are the interpreter between us. And you don't know who that officer was.
This is the person that saw her executed.
Very little English, and we got to conversing with him. Found out this one guy, he really liked Coca-Cola. I said, "You saw her plane?" "Yes, yes." I said, "Where'd you see it?" He said, "Right here. Right here." With my sister.
You know, Amelia Earhart's plane is down on the strip there.
When we come back to the
Supposedly they took it for a flight.
captain, or not captain, lieutenant or something, they put it across the, there's a little bit of slope. I presume there's somebody in hit that in camp where we went.
Weeks and 3 days after the
Just to be clear, what happened is the Japanese were in control of Saipan until the Americans came in and kicked them out in a horrific, bloody battle.
We knew what was going on. Every day.
Guards in our area.
And
at the end of the month, we box them up and put them in a box. Nail it up, seal it up. still say they're somewhere in the archives or something. I mean,
I personally think that
Eventually, they say that the
If that was a ruse to cover up where she was, I don't.
Why do I think that she was taken prisoner? Well, I just assume that they suspicion she was a spy for the U.S. Why else would she be flying that plane with 2 high altitude cameras mounted in it?
Well, at first I really didn't know what to think about it. And why would...
I think over here,
no question
this
the
guy's.
government isn't giving us any more than they want to give us.
Nah, I don't know about that. They just can't find the answer.
I don't know the cause of why they didn't make it public, but there's a lot on it. It was put in the hangar right on the last there. Been a mystery to me why it was kept so secret. That row of islands around there where she was supposed to land on, those belonged to the Japanese. They were reading that they were given to the Japanese during World War I.
Eventually, this guy, I don't take any more time to play it because I'm just about done here. This guy says that he saw them destroy the plane, that he was hiding out in the bushes somewhere, and he saw this plane being destroyed.
Was our ally. And, well, you can say, how did she miss that island? They only had one ship out there. Best I can tell about that, they were supposed to build that on Holland, but it belonged to them. I have no doubt that what Amelia Earhart's airplane, because of circumstances and the way it was brought about, the way it was handled. I don't know the cause of why they didn't make it public, but there's a lot about, and we got out. I mean,
Here it is.
Colonel Wallace, the only one knew anything about it. We kind of thought we was in territory, in a territory. Didn't knew anything about it except Colonel Wallace. Those 3 guys and Colonel Wallace, the only one knew anything about it. We kind of thought we was in territory, in a territory that we wasn't supposed to be in, and we got out. I mean, we was on unholy ground. I mean, wasn't much to say. We just wanted to understand why are they destroying it? We thought it would have been blared all over the island, you know, and told everybody, but it was like hush hush all the time. People why are they destroying?
There was a white man and a white woman in buried.
And knew anything about it except about, you know, it's about being this is history. And at the time that we were the only one in the
Does this guy say that?
we were in the know-how. I mean, we got a lot of information that we knew what was going on.
As far as the
No. Picture
Were fine.
About, you know, it's about being this is history. And at the time that we were the only one in the compound that knew anything about it except Colonel Wallace. Those 3 guys and Colonel Wallace, the only one knew anything about it. We kind of thought we was in territory, in a territory that we wasn't supposed to be in, and we got out. I mean, you know,
I didn't tell anybody.
Alright, so that's it. There's some fantastic stories in here that basically makes a very good case for her having survived, her being imprisoned, and her being executed as a spy. And this is kind of like Roosevelt's Watergate in a certain way. And Roosevelt's actually a very distant cousin of mine, but I mean, it really isn't all that clear. When you put it all together, you get it from all these different sources. I mean, as an individual in California, you're having, 200 people in Saipan say that but this is kind of like the Roswell of World War II. I mean, there's, you watch documentaries on Roswell, and you'll see a bunch of people claiming that they definitely saw aliens and a spaceship. Hundreds of people will say that. So that groups of people can get together and say things years before they're going to die. Not but a year before they're going to die. A lot of these people that were interviewed ended up dying shortly thereafter.
It was put in the hangar right on the last there. Mystery to me why it was kept so secret. That row of islands around there where she was supposed to land on, those belonged to the Japanese. They were, the reading, and that they were given to the Japanese during the World War.
There's no question to go.
So that's it. I guess I'll stop.